Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra
Hello,
querida,
friends.
contaminada y única nave espacial. La ha dado otra vuelta sobre su eje imaginario y, por supuesto, sigue generando acontecimientos en pleno desarrollo. Y si no me ven en el mapa o en contraplano con la imagen espacial de nuestra querida y contaminada, es que tenemos un invitado.
We have a guest, and I feel especially honored by reasons that you will see to introduce you Dr. Juan Bautista Segales, who is a doctor of philosophy, Bolivian, of our sister nation. He started in Universidad de San Andrés and Universidad Autónoma de Mexico, where he studied social science and had a doctor's degree in Latin American politics. He earned an award for critical thought in 2016 for a work called What Does Thinking Mean in Latin America? He's director of the social science master's degree at the University of Mexico City. He's a lecturer in educational topics, and he has directed several courses and seminars, and he was member of the founding group of a magazine called Self-Determination, translated, and many other things. Welcome, Doctor. Thank you very much. We are honored to have you. In my case, Plurinational State of Bolivia is closely related to my life experience, and we will talk about them if we have time. I would like you to explain first, why do we have our honor to have you with us? A work group that started last week is trying to discuss our problems from a decolonizing perspective. Invited us for a seminar where we are addressing how we can decolonize the academic practice of social science and philosophy, but also practices of many activists that are who are directly involved with transformation processes in Venezuela and elsewhere. Decolonize academic practice. Please translate that. Not for me, but you know we have the honor that this program that some said decades ago that would only remain Class A, but is watched by all social cultural segments, and I think this is novel. Partly, this is a new concept in the context of social sciences. It is born, conceptually speaking, in mid-end 90s. In 1492, or when we celebrated 500 years of 1492, which was a paradigmatic moment and had great impact on the popular movements that were contained in the sense they hadn't appeared on the political scenario directly. And when we were celebrating the 5th centennial of 1492, to recover the memory of what had happened 5 centuries back, an opening of some kind of awareness of history that had not been studied in deep came out. The idea that we need to think again problems that we were usually thinking in other ways. Why? I always say the 90s is a dark are dark times for Marxist and left groups, because not only the Berlin Wall fell, but the experience of real socialism, together with that, the terrible, disastrous implementation of the neoliberal model practically destroyed the working class, because they suppressed factories, and the working class started to disappear from the production scenario. And at this time, terrible consequences of the neoliberal model appeared. People felt that in a strong way, and allegedly, we don't have working class anymore. Allegedly, in the 20th century, the revolutionary class was the working class. So what happened in the 90s? Certain individuals that allegedly had no revolutionary conscience as peasants, because allegedly were petit bourgeois, started exercising political practice, not only with their experiences from the struggles they had had, but also started recovering possible visions upon which other types of visions could appear about politics. And this is when popular movements of the neighborhoods and the peasants started uprising, and now originary peoples as well. So when they appear in politics in Bolivia, it starts especially with the March of Life, that the Amazon peoples that it's performed a great march on the highways, not because the working class used to struggle in the streets, but when the originary peoples go out on the roads, it's another kind of politics. You're resorting to another memory, and the sense of making policies changes. And this makes up social science to sensitize in view of this new scenario that started allowing us to think in another way. But this is a huge rupture of paradigm. Well, we always say the epistemological reflection always starts by being political. And epistemological experiences that starts from politics after the terrible experience we had from Salvador Allende's Chile in the 70 and 73. We not only had an essential political experience, but also academic experience. It's a fracture of international rupture of the international right. We are living here a broad experience that, because I have the ITT book that was behind that coup, besides the U.S. Embassy, but they killed one of the dissident generals in the United States and her secretary. The thing is that all paradigms are fractured because of how they acted, because the first thing they did in Chile was, and what I'm going to say is true, first thing that they disappeared was toilet paper and women's napkins. But then they continue with food, inflation, and repression. Well, what is usually debated is what happened in the political level, but in the academic world, we had conditions similar to what you are living here in Venezuela, that we could start thinking politics in another way. We had, for example, institutions like CEREM with great academicians who left the country. One of them, Hugo Zimmermann, in my opinion, is the first great epistemologist who appears in Spanish language. I'm not only talking about Latin America, but in the entire world of Spanish language, because he is the first academician who dares to think no longer from the Anglo-Saxon or European paradox, but from our own problems. What we say now in the decolonized thought. All social sciences and philosophy we know were basically created in 5 countries: England, France, Germany, Italy, and the United States. And whoever knows the way how social sciences are made knows that the social scientists think on the problems that happen in their reality. So the academicians that are based upon Europe and the United States are thinking on their own problems. Of course, they are not universal, and when they formalize these problems and put them at the level of science, they can make viable in the sense of developing and overcoming their own problems, and this is why United States and Europe developed. But since this was in existence in our perspective, that knowledge did not allow to get to know each other and did not allow production according to our reality. I'm going to say something in benefit of our vocation of informing, entertaining, and educating. Please define as pedagogue epistemology for our TV watchers. Well, this is what we're trying to explain now. The epistemological reflection appears, which is a self-awareness of why we think what we think when we think. Allegedly think. Usually we think, but we don't know how we are thinking. And we don't know where the concepts or general categories with which we are thinking what we are thinking come from. In that sense, social science and philosophy in Latin America were colonized because these questions were not made. They thought that the U.S. and European thought was universal. It was never universal. It pretends to be universal, but it's not, because it's another reality. And we brought that knowledge and applied mechanically to our realities. What happened was a cover. Before he died, Hugo Zimmerman, 1-2 months before, we had a round of reflections of what happened in Chile in 1973, and he said, after this experience in exile, after 1974, I always asked myself, because he even has books on this topic, on historic awareness, he said, I asked myself if the participants during this Chilean experience, 70-73, were aware of the historic political revolutionary moment we were undergoing. And he said, until to this day, my answer is that we were naive, unaware. We did not know what we confronted. Why? Because our diagnosis of reality was in theory, but not in reality. What does this mean? They started from theories that are related to other realities and not ours. This is why instead of producing knowledge, they were uncovering. And since it was formally consistent with a scientific production, logically it appeared as scientific knowledge, but the problem is always in the politics. In politics is where we see if knowledge is true or not. And all politics were disastrous and had a little or nothing to do with reality. Of course, it's easy to accuse the right, but this was performed by the Latin American Eurocentrist Marxism. Now, when the Peruvian experience started with Mariátegui trying to appropriate the Marxist thought to see from our reality how we can develop our own, well, he was attacked by the left. He is being discovered just now. So, in the case of Zimmerman, he made an effort to reflect, to see, are we aware of the types of concepts and categories that we use to make science? Do we have that capacity to make the great questions of what reality is? What does truth means? And is my reality the same as yours? Exactly. So it was evidently that our reality is different from the European or North American, called the Western reality. But the problem is the following. And this in relation to what Professor Dusa said here in this interview. He was able to successfully impose one vision or philosophy of history whereby our peoples always appeared as pre-modern or pre-capitalistic. And pre means inferior here, where the image of what a people, nation, or culture should have was given mainly by Europe or the United States, and how, in order to present that image, they had used science and philosophy. It seemed that was true, because modernity had been able to develop humanity. So the course of history that belonged to our peoples were to follow this road. And this was very well argued, and that's why they made science and philosophy, especially these last 2 centuries when Latin American republics appeared, that from the beginning imitated those constitutions. We tried to implement development processes. With what results? We are still the same or in worse conditions. What does this mean? It means that this is something of the core topics of decolonization, which means that a country, culture, a nation, if it wants to develop, it not only has to be able to produce economy, it also must be able to produce knowledge with which that economy is made viable. Otherwise, it won't be able to develop. So break with any metropolis from which it depends. How would you appeal to the Catalan case? Because Catalans are self-sufficient economically, culturally. I would prefer to talk about us and not Catalonia. Well, I'm accustomed as an international informer. Let's continue. Well, our problem is not their problem. We have to start from our own thing, and as we develop our own thing. Or why did the Che's initiative failed in Bolivia? Well, let's talk about this later. I don't want to interrupt your flow. Yes, this is an excellent example in order to illustrate what I'm saying. Well, I lived this so closely, it marked me. Yes, because we have lived the consequences of all that. Of course, I visited everything, the ravine. Yes, and this affects us very much because in the 70s, the contents of political ideological formation of the left was deeply influenced by Che's image. We lived bodily through the name of Che. So when all the accumulation of political memoir is broken with the coup in 1980, Garcia Mesa, it's a strong rupture which has impacted where did we go wrong? And that was a similar experience with the Allende's government in Chile, because we were sure after the coup of Natush Bush in 1979, the people went out to the streets and we defeated the army in the streets. So the people said, we are about to touch socialism. Next year, they disappeared a leftist movement with this capacity of political memoir. So we had to rethink and restate everything. And what did Garcia Mesa's role play? Well, the coup of Natush Bush was defeated by people. But Garcia Mesa, they had learned the lesson already, so now they defeated us completely. And the symbolic act of demolishing the building of Bolivian Central Worker building, I would like to give a personal testimony of that. I was covering the coup for this channel, and suddenly an official comes in without any identification on his uniform, everything very well prepared. And in the lobby, that was La Paz Sheraton Hotel, now it's called another thing, he pointed a gun against me and my cameraman and asked me to go with him, and as if we were transparent. And I started screaming, "We are being kidnapped." Nobody moved one finger. They put us in a military, unidentified military car. They took us to an underground where the European, the Human Rights Commission was there. They didn't have the doors closed, so my cameraman started shouting because he was scared, and so they took me to the basement. And so when you say that it was a perfect coup, I want to tell you this very shortly. So I asked him not to start with torture with us, because I had told my ambassador that he had to look for us every 30 minutes. So the man started changing, and in the basement, where I don't know what they were planning to do with us, we finished in the penthouse talking to one of the leaders of that coup. First dialogue, "Where did you lose that eye?" in a terrorist coup. And I told him, "You gave a clean coup from your point of view, of course, not mine. You have an image to take care. Well, declare, I come from the Venezuelan TV chain, because you are being condemned by all America, and OAS is meeting here." And he said, "Were you a military?" I said, "Yes." "You give me your military word that you are going to publish everything I say?" And then he accepted to recording the camera, and then I went directly to the airport. But I passed through the Bolivian workers' building that there was nothing there. Not one floor remained. That type of aggression against the working class I'd never seen. And that, of course, was very well prepared by the School of the Americas. And this is why the attempt of decolonizing the doctrine, army doctrine, for our armies to take care and defend the peoples and not the interest of the empire, because it's an ideological formation. It's not only about ideology, but science and philosophy. You know, even the CIA uses medical science anthropologists, linguists, to torture efficiently. If politics were sex, they would all have some kind of phobia. But I remind you that from that hotel, I gave a conference, the armed forces of Bolivia and ours, and suddenly I had to give a press conference before both, and I was escorted by the soldiers, and I probably wouldn't have had much to maneuver. Now, this brilliant, vibrant reality that the sister nation of Bolivia, well, where is it going to? What can we learn from it? Because I've been in the ravine of El Juro, where El Che was one of the great novelties that we had with the process, and that is being strongly influenced in the sociological, political, economic, and even philosophical thought, in principle continental, Mexico southwards, but little by little we are starting to erupt in the third world. Now, decolonial schools of thought are appearing in South Africa, in Australia, in New Zealand. So where does this process start politically? It started in Bolivia with what I was telling you, this experience of the Amazon peoples that started to rise from the lowlands and erupt in politics. But we were in the 80s because this is related to history, with our history. If our thought is not able to formalize what historically is happening in our present, if we won't be able to state the great problems we have now, and accordingly give these process continuity, because our peoples progress when there's a knowledge that illuminates the processes we are undergoing. Otherwise, we just stay where we are, go back. So this is the great challenge of social science and philosophy. I am highly concerned of your summary of reality, but we must admit that it's a very objective analysis, without which we can't attempt to change. But there is no change in view. There are changes. Well, I work a lot with young generations who have other sensitivities regarding our realities. We say that when 2 or 3 generations are formed inside a theoretical framework or paradigm, a vision of reality, it's difficult to change because ideas are not only ideas that go in, that are in the brain. They are material neuron connections, as when you switch something. We call that synapses. So a connection is made. And if we repeat a knowledge, or you strongly believe in a knowledge, no matter how wrong it is, that connection or synapses or neuron relation will grow and strengthen. So to change a neuron structure that has become a very thick copper cable, let's call it like that, is very difficult. Generations left the Marxist generations of the 20th century that were formed in the Marxist paradigm is difficult to change, but it has nothing to do to be smart or not, or to have a Che Guevara t-shirt. It has nothing to do with that. It is related to the type of conceptual and categorical education to destruct the brain neurons and connect politically to the reality. So the new generations that partly have a diagnosis of what has happened with Marxism and critical thought in the 20th century know that that doesn't work and that we need another kind of thought consistent with that reality. How do we flee from neoliberalism? So this attempt of rethinking ourselves, this is the sense of the book. Well, I want to show it once again. This is a difficult topic to sustain, not because it's wrong, but it's difficult, and I think your courage is great in the academic and pedagogic sense. And Juan José Batista says, what does thinking from Latin America mean? Yes, because many think about Latin America, but rethink ourselves from Latin America is difficult. Will this be distributed in Venezuela? Well, this is the edition with which I earned the award. Simón Bolívar Critical Thought Award. It's not a small thing. Another edition was issued when I was awarded, and there's no one left. So, and this one also is out, but I think in 1 or 2 months we're going to have another issue. So the hypothesis behind this is the title could say, what does thinking Latin America mean? Well, Latin America as a political, existential, cultural space has been thought since the 18th century, but especially in the 19th century, when we have a new reality. Well, including Teilhard de Chardin, the leftist priests, etc. Yes, Latin America has always been thought from theoretical cognitive production of Europe and then United States, because we say historically, since the Spanish arrived until the U.S. government, they always destroyed our pedagogic institutions and eliminated our amaltas. They cut their heads and destroyed them for them to impose their own type of knowledge. So at the beginning they posed it by force and then through arguments, conscience and philosophy. So they put this at universal level, and universal means that it can be applied in anywhere. Why? Because they produced a concept in a flat, the homogeneous space, and homogenized everything, and thought that they could apply the theories in any place. A very dangerous generalization. And they thought that by applying this to our realities, knowledge would be produced. But the truth is that reality is not like this. This means that the content of the concept that produced modern thought has little or nothing to do with reality. So as we were in a process of economic political colonization, because we were after the 19th century in post-colonial processes. In the 20th century, after the Second World War, we started discovering little by little how the dominators' knowledge had been introduced in us in such a way that we thought our reality with a categorical framework or a philosophical framework that had little or nothing to do with us. So, what does thinking from Latin America mean? So, initially, excuse me, I would like to say that the Caribbean and to the north of South America, they thought with the United States style. Yes, and since this created unknowledge, we always say a terrible diagnosis of reality generates terrible policies. When do we know a theory works or not in social science? The policies it produces. But academicism of social sciences says that a theory is true when it adjusts to the criteria, empirical and or true verification inside the theoretical framework. But the problem here is politics, reality, what is practically produced. Where are we in our daily reality? We are in a transition of recovering horizons to be able to rethink ourselves in another way, so we are able to develop ourselves not only politically and economically, but existentially as well. It's a recovery of our own humanity, and this is what this book is about. From Latin America. And what does from Latin America mean? One of the specificities of the modern thought means. Allegedly, in modernity, we are in a secular age, which means we are beyond myth, beyond religion, beyond utopia. So we are in reality. This is what it would mean. And here comes the work of Francine Quilmes. Please repeat it. Franz Kinkelamer. In my opinion, he is the current Marx. For me, this is news, because could you tell us about this? Well, he worked from... He is German and lives in Latin America since 1963, and he is now living in Costa Rica. He, rethinking all this from Marx's work, he discovers that not only modernity, but hard, scientific, natural thought, let's say Alan Popper, is so utopic or mythical, like as any myth or utopia. Now, why? Because myth or utopia is a human condition. Why is it a human condition? Because humanly we cannot know all realities. And since we can't know this, for reality to have sense for us, we have to resort to great stories. In science and philosophy, they're called ideal models, or in real life, they're great myths and utopias. What is behind the modern Western thought are there myths and utopias that are not ours. Exactly. Now, on one hand, there are myths and other myths. Myths of domination, but also of liberation. Utopias for liberation and domination. After 5 centuries, we've had enough time to be able to factually evaluate where the European, modern Western European paradigm leads to not only elimination of nature, but also of humanity, because the idea of conceiving nature as an object is modernity. No other people or culture had thought about that. Nature is not a thing, it is a subject. So I need to turn it into an object to do whatever they want, or merchandise. So this is infinite exploitation. This is the content of infinite produced by modernity. Resources are ad infinitum, which is false. And besides, we've done everything possible to destroy those values that nature places to our hands. Exactly. So that idea of nature is live, that it is a thing, an object. We always say, if the idea or concept that our peoples had of nature, if it had been false, it would have disappeared in 5 centuries, and it hasn't. Why hasn't it disappeared? Because it is related not only to history, it is related to truth. And we say this because it has to do with life. Life is the horizon or the criteria upon which we can evaluate if something is true or not. And modern rationality is leading to the suicide of humanity and destruction of nature. And this is why it is false. So in order to evaluate it, the criteria does not belong to modern science, Western philosophy or science, but in the planet, it is... what kind of myths or utopias will we start upon? What modernity has denied always since 1492 is our great myths and utopias, thanks to which they have not, our peoples have remained throughout the histories, but are now appearing as a much more rational and viable rationality than what we had 5 centuries. This is notable. Now, how can I explain John Smith, the man from the street, this sound reality? I speak every day in my programs showing our space craft, And I'm talking about our only dear contaminated spacecraft. How do we translate this drama you just painted elegantly for people on the street? Well, this has to do with decolonization. We are colonized in such a way that we don't believe in the validity or the level of truth of our own historic, cultural, and mythical horizons. We believe what modernity says of them, that they are inferior. We believe they are in the past and they remain in the past. When we believe that, we are stating that our history is not possible, upon which we can develop other ways of life, and we still impose what modernity has imposed. Modernity doesn't need to keep imposing because we do it, because we have interiorized the colonization in such a way that we reproduce it. But it's not only that. Quantum physics is discovering that even the stomach and the digestive system is another brain. And Marx shows this very well. The energy and informatic contact of our neurons is produced through some type of consumption that we have in our daily food consumption. That is said by Marx. When I consume capitalistic merchandise or food, what I'm consuming ultimately is what being contained in that capitalistic merchandise. That's not only capitalism but modernity. And that through digestion and blood reaches the brain as information. So when I confront a knowledge that is related to that kind of dimension of reality, I update it. And I said, yes, it's true. But when I have another neural brain cerebral structure with another consumption, let's say Andy and Amazon, we have another vision of reality. So that other vision of reality that is not only an idea, but is the incarnation of a way of conceiving and interpreting reality that is not only idea, but it's a feeling. A neurobiologist, I can't remember his name right now, has a book called Descartes' Error. Descartes' error. So he says, I think and I exist is not an idea, it's a feeling. It's a feeling. So partly, this is what I want to say, is that the informatic content of our neurons is constituted on based on feelings or sensations. So a country that had a world record of red meat consumption should have another feeling. The materialness of its subjectivity is materially constituted for a given consumption, like the one you're describing. So Marx says in Grundrisse, he says, when capitalism comes out, the first thing it is concerned of is consumption. How it induced for more consumption, whether it is needed or not. So at the beginning, Marx says revolutions will take place in highly industrialized countries. But when he lived more than 10 years in England, he noticed that the British working class will never make the revolution because they have subject awareness. They are programmed since childhood. And second, because they consume the same then the employer, capitalistic bourgeois employer, and they have a subjectivity that is similar to that of their employers. And this is why the British will never make the revolution. But on the other hand, the Russians that have another kind of subjectivity, they will. And Marx says, to make a revolution is possible only in countries their people have a solidarity awareness, conscience. When a highly industrialized country has been established subjectively by capitalistic relations, what it develops as subjectivity is selfishness. So in highly industrialized countries, selfishness is also highly developed. And let's think with a neoliberal model, they will never die for their fellow citizens. And Marx said that between 1857 and 59 in Dossier. So this is why when the possibility of the eruption of revolution in an allegedly delayed country, at the beginning Marx was pro-Russian. The first ones that understood were the Russians that did not have any proletarian workers. It was the problem of the Russian rural community. So in our case, we're reading the 5 writings Marx made between 1857 and 1882, before he died, where he transformed his categorical framework. And talking about 5, we only have 5 minutes of program. I don't want to interrupt, but we have to adapt to this reality. But your presence has been very interesting. So Marx makes a transition of the working class to the concept of community. Because the community, and Marx shows it very clearly in the Dossier, to be able to develop capitalism must destroy any solidary way of life, which have been developed inside communities. But this is deep Christian, because they all had in common, they had nothing, individual property. So overcoming this is modern society in capitalistic language. And it's a modern ego, selfish ego, that is linked to the others only for interest, not because of solidarity. So that subject is not good for revolution. Those who are good for revolution are those who are willing to die for their fellow citizens. So when we discover other peoples, we discover that the problem now is not going from modern society to community, but from the other way around, to go back to community. This is what we call transmodern and post-Western, because the content of the concept of community in our peoples is much more powerful even than Christian tradition. And I go back to the Bible. They had nothing in individual, but in common. And in originary peoples, even land. Where are we going? 2 minutes. We are in a process of decolonization. I am very enthusiastic with the constitution that is taking place here. As some leftist groups say, it's not a bureaucratic measure, but a deeply political measure of which the Venezuelan people must be aware the great challenge it is confronting, the possibility of producing a new political constitution that is not bourgeois or modern or capitalistic or Western. And there comes the idea of the community state. So we have to be aware of the great challenge the Venezuelan people is confronting, that is not only constituents. When the people are part of this power, it presses in such way that in the end they are only writing what the people are producing as knowledge. So we need to produce another concept of charter, constitutional charter, or a new constitution, beyond the type of constitution produced by modernity that from the beginning had been to the service of bourgeoisie, and now transnational financial capital. The productive transnational capital are now employer of the world financial capital. You know this very well. Even productive capital is subject to financial capital and colonized. This is what I think you repeat what Victoria Nuland said, fuck Europe. And what do Europeans say? Silent. And they are domesticated. Dr. Juan Jose Bautista, I thank you deeply for this book that, of course, I will devour. What does thinking from Latin America mean? And I would like to give you back my book that is called 76 Sundays, because through those days I saw nothing but a computer to deliver what we would broadcast on Sunday, and this represents my experiences and trips that also talk about contemporary story, but from the point of view of a former war correspondent and international analyst. I would like to give this because I honor my fraternal feeling with the pluralized national state of Bolivia, because I remember President Lydia Gayler for her honored me. Once she said, Walter loves Bolivia. And I said, why? Yes, because we were about to kill him and he still loves us. Well, those were my experiences in several coups. And I give this on behalf of also this was a sweet vengeance. These pages were written by me when I worked in a very important Sunday newspaper. And I said, well, I have experience in radio, press, and TV. I would like to withdraw. And she asked why. Well, I denounced some people in Uruguay, and I had to leave. So this program is over. It has been a pleasure to have you here. I don't have to tell you that when we almost leave our skin in a country, you become part of it. And I'm very closely linked to Bolivia. As Evo Morales said with his humbleness, he said, may I call you comrade? And I said, of course. It was a great conversation we had, and each time you come, I ask you to come and share your knowledge. If you invite me, I would be glad to. On behalf of my team, wherever you are on the other side of the screen, thank you for being here. From Studio 3 of Venezolana Televisión, the pioneer Latin American television in international satellite information. And we started before anybody else. And arrived to this, to arrive with international and human information, because we are all sailors of this only dear and contaminated ship. Thank you very much.